My experience with Bethesda games has been mostly positive. I liked Skyrim and Oblivion, and I even queued outside a store in the rain at midnight for the former. Since then, I've watched developer Bethesda deal some serious damage to their own Fallout franchise, and re-release Skyrim to the point of nauseam. I had no faith left to justify buying Starfield. For the doubters like me, Microsoft had an extra trick up their sleeve. I didn't have to buy this game. I could play it on Game Pass on launch day, the 6th of September 2023, provided I had access to an Xbox Series console or a PC. A quick note on Game Pass, as I don't normally subscribe. I like having physical copies of games, or at the very least, some assurance that the game won't magically disappear from a subscription library on a whim. That kind of thing comes in handy when I need to find 3 seconds of a game not on Game Pass, like this entirely unrelated Megadimension Neptunia footage. But for a game I had some apprehensions about, Game Pass is a perfect storm. I can test this out without needing to pay for retail. I'm weirdly glad to say, Starfield's first impressions were better than I expected. The game begins with your character in a mine, breaking rocks to pay the bills. You touch a glowy protrusion and get knocked out. Upon waking up, you enter the character creator, which contains a good amount of customization options, and importantly, gives you a chance to pick which skills you start with. Shortly after, you're presented with the tutorial fight, as you and your miner colleagues beat down some pirates. Plot events happen and you get a ship and fly to the city of New Atlantis. This is the game's big opening hub city, and it's damn impressive. Walking into the spaceport here and looking around the shops and points of interest really hammers home the scale that Bethesda was working with. You then meet members of an organisation called Constellation and go in search of more of these artifacts. That's pretty much all you need to know about the main story without getting into spoiler territory, and to be honest, the majority of this game's content will be experienced outside of these story moments. Barring a handful of surprises in New Game Plus, this story is serviceable, but propped up by the factions and lore elements within this world that you need to branch away from the main path to truly appreciate. Even just on the starter city of New Atlantis, the divide between those who live and work on the surface and those who subsist in the underground well area provides strong world-building foundations and an inherent socio-economic conflict to deliver intriguing character interactions, provided you actually go looking for them. There are these little microcosms to unpick on every planet with a city, and these fuel the majority of the better writing and character development in the game. Alternatively, you can just decide to be free. There are a plethora of options available to you once you settle into the world, and you don't have to follow the narrative once you get to New Atlantis. You could decide to explore the nearby systems, or jump a star over and check out Earth. You can pick up some generated missions to earn a couple credits, or wander around the city and shop, or even decide to start your life of crime. Yes, all of these sound fairly standard, but this is very much like other Bethesda games in the best and worst ways. If what you want is to roleplay a character in this world, you can do it. If what you want is to min-max money and XP, you can do that too. I'd recommend hitting the main story a bit though, as this is where you meet a lot of the characters and get your companions.
Thanks. I appreciate you saying so.
Like other Bethesda games, some of these are going to grind your eardrums and infuriate you. Some are going to be painfully obnoxious, and others are going to be your trusted sidekicks who you love to be around. Here, there's a certain level of safe in each of these characters, which did leave me struggling to pick a favourite. The game forces Sarah upon you first, and I found her brand of intellectual disapproval to be much more yes mum than yes mommy. I was confident that I didn't like the robot Vasco, whose voice isn't lovably robotic, it's painfully slow and paused in an incredibly irritating manner.
All statements made have been factual.
One positive I will note is that there are a lot of named characters here, and all the character models are unique. You're unlikely to come across a copy and paste vendor or quest giver character, even if some of the unnamed citizens are placed in weird locations and their generic one-liners are painful to hear more than a few times. In terms of gameplay, Starfield has a variety of elements to choose from, but the primary actions fall under 3 headings: combat, RPG mechanics, and base or shipbuilding. Let's discuss combat first, as that's one of the more common activities you'll be doing. This is a first-person game by default, but the option to play in third person is always there. Combat is mostly ranged with guns, or up close and personal with melee weapons. Each style of combat can be performed by each character, provided they have such a weapon, but proficiency and effectiveness are determined by skills and modifiers. It's these skills that I'll touch on later, but weapons can have different effects, and guns and suit pieces can be modified to improve them in specific ways. Gunplay has certainly improved on what we last saw from Bethesda in Fallout. It's lacking flair at times, and most of the weapons feel painfully mundane for a futuristic setting, but it's more than functional. I'd say this is quite similar to Cyberpunk 2077's gunplay if you're looking for a feel comparison. The major downsides here are that hit detection is a little off with some weapons, and there are a lot of world objects that you feel you should be able to shoot through, but can't. Melee gameplay is very frantic if you don't have any skills to augment your attacks, and tends to benefit stealth and surprise heavily. As you'd expect, you can throw grenades, take cover, sneak around, take a non-lethal approach, or run in all guns blazing. Regardless of which method you choose, your end goal is still the same: make all the red dots disappear. Another area that this game has seen some gains in is enemy AI. Admittedly, this still needs a lot of work, but if you're coming into this from Fallout, you will notice an improvement. Human enemies will now retreat or move behind cover, rather than rushing right at you. They're less easy to bait out into choke points, and don't bunch up as much. They still do stupid things from time to time, but then again, so does your companion. These get in the way a lot, and I really did think that what was missing here was the ability to tell your companion to do something. Like, to attack, to go here, to take cover. If they're going to be this bad, I feel we need the option to put a location in your crosshair and just tell them to go there, and this would help address pathing and combat issues. Once your enemies are dead, you take everything useful off their corpses and loot your surroundings. You can find resources, healing items, weapons, armor, junk, things to sell. These are all par for the course for Bethesda games, and the only issue I had early on was a lack of inventory space in which to put it all. As you play a bit more, you get better at learning what to take and what to leave behind, and some resources come in more useful than others, as you can craft, research, and mod gear with these, and you can pull some legendary or rare gear off your foes to help for your next encounter. As you fight or quest, you level up and can unlock more skills. To reach the next rank of a skill, you have to meet certain challenge criteria, such as scanning a number of planets to increase your scanning skill. These ranks within skills are what make up the bulk of your intended progression, and contribute towards what feels like progression bloat. There are so many abilities here that drive key aspects of gameplay that you need to put points in them. Nothing is mandatory, but some, like the jetpack boost skill, are almost essential to get around planets without crippling boredom. Others, like outpost building and habitation, are actually needed to use one of the better in-game mechanics. It's great that there's a lot of useful skills that affect gameplay, and that you can customize your character to be unique. But acquiring these skills feels like a chore. Having to complete a challenge and then dump another point in these does mean that the road to unlocking the skills you might want is long, and that's not helped by the lack of a respec feature. You can customize your appearance at any point, but cannot reallocate your points. There's no level cap, so eventually you can get every skill, and what you prioritize is up to you how you want to play. But if you've made a mistake early on, and you don't realize this until you reach level 15, you might have wasted some of your most efficiently acquired levels on a scattershot of science skills that leave you weak in combat. This no respec option was a bit of a red flag, as this was also a missing system at the launch of Fallout 76. A slow reallocation system was added to that game after launch, and this wouldn't have bothered me so much if leveling didn't feel so slow. I'm aware that there are likely dedicated guides out there that can help you get XP fast, but the normal amount you're given as you just naturally play and quest does feel tuned to the low side. I think it would feel like less work if each skill only had 2 ranks to master rather than 4, and this would have helped me feel like I'd progressed more without feeling like I'm wasting points just trying to unlock things. This menu system also deserves some patch attention. Moving items between inventories is noticeably awkward, and a nice quality of life feature would be to let you move items to your companion's inventory from within your own, rather than having to enter into a conversation and then request access. In general, moving any item from yourself to your ship, to outposts, to vendors is very unintuitive, and it's not always clear if you're in the buy or sell mode at each vendor, or from which infantry you are buying or selling, unless you know exactly where to look on screen. Inventory management is a huge part of this game, and some minor UI changes or a bit of color coding here or there would be a good idea, even if this system isn't completely torn down and redone. This game does pause when you enter the menu, so this poor UI doesn't hurt as much as you'd think in combat, certainly compared to the online 76. As for an additional nitpick, you can assign items to quick slots by favoriting them, but I'm not quite sure why this wasn't just called assign to quick slot. The same could also be said of fast travel, a system that I really liked in principle. In a world this big, you don't always want to feel like you have to redo the boring parts. It's a really good choice to let me walk from my ship to an outpost and then have the option to quickly hop back, rather than treading the already walked path. Perhaps the biggest issue I have with the game's systems is mapping, or rather, a lack thereof. It makes sense that when you land on a random instance of a planet's surface, you don't have the full topography the moment you go there. But when you land in New Atlantis and you're searching for a specific shop or building, say for a quest or a vendor, you can't just open a map that shows these. Undoubtedly, one of the game's highlights was its ship customization mechanic. What you begin with is a functional light craft that sets the tone well. You really feel like the ship is physicalized potential, and when you progress a little further, you get the opportunity to customize and improve on this. It's at this point I started to see what Bethesda's real vision for Starfield was. I never trust my ability to make in games like this, and went and bought a pre-built ship with more cargo space and an industrial theme. But there's a competent design tool if you've got that creative spark. When I think back, what truly struck me about Fallout 4, a game I felt was solid but buggy, was the world. It was about this morphed landscape that had retained vestiges of its former form, the contrast between crumbling architecture of man and the land being slowly reclaimed by nature. What gives Starfield that same life is its potential, and that is mostly portrayed through this ship. Your ability to edit it and build upon it helps you become attached to it, and it plays such a vital part in how you experience the rest of the game. Saving up for a new ship or a new ship module allows you to set your own goals, and gives you a gameplay relevant reason to go out and make a lot of credits. The gameplay itself failed to drive that for me, so I needed this carrot to chase. The customization of your ship is undoubtedly the part of the game I appreciated the most, even if ship flying and combat is mostly underwhelming, and even more so if you haven't put any skills into the tech tree. The detriment to this is very much in the way that key aspects of any space game involve landing and taking off. This game is not trying to be No Man's Sky, Elite Dangerous, or Star Citizen, but when leaving a planet and arriving at one are just cutscenes you have no control over, it does leave you feeling a bit underwhelmed, like you're being forced into a fast travel instead of having the option to do it yourself. Base building falls into a similar camp. You use resources to set up automated outposts, to mine raw ingredients, and then even fabricate more complex ones. This provides your character a supply chain to fund upgrades, research, or just to sell for profit. You can station your companions and recruitable NPCs at these locations or on your ship to get bonuses. You can even set up your own automated empire throughout the stars. As long as you're not going into this expecting it to be like Factorio, Satisfactory, or Dyson Sphere program, it's certainly got a strong foundation. It's only let down by its terribly janky controls on PC. In a failing effort to keep this from being too long a video, I'm glossing over a lot of the smaller, traditionally Bethesda things that you're probably familiar with if you've played this type of game before. So much so that I really felt like I'd played this already, even though I hadn't. For me, that hurts the game more than you'd think. Something set in such a different setting to the Elder Scrolls and Fallout games, and a brand new IP no less, should feel like steps have been taken to evolve that formula. And aside from a few small things here and there, this doesn't feel like it takes into account 12 years of technological or ideological progress from how Skyrim was designed. If what you wanted was Fallout in space, then this is going right to the top of your Game of the Year list. For those who played the Outer Worlds, an Obsidian game that is another example of Fallout in space. One of the biggest problems was how the NPCs look right at you. It was very unnatural. Starfield seems to have steered hard in the other direction to avoid this, as a lot of NPCs look around you, but not at you. This is more awkward but also quite natural, yet there's still a bit of an issue with the camera being fixed during most of these conversational interactions that feels aggressively constrained. The most impressive thing about Starfield is how it handles itself technically, as this is by far the most stable Bethesda game I've played, and that's not up for debate. This feat is more impressive given the scale here too. Even the visual glitches and pathing issues are less frequent, and this did run fairly smoothly and was very bug-free. This does come with a massive performance cost though, and Starfield was the first game that managed to get my GPU above 90% utilization. There were some moments when this even dipped below 60 FPS as well. This was mostly when landing or leaving planets and walking around New Atlantis during the daytime. I think the big issue is that the game is missing DLSS support, which likely hurts Nvidia's GPUs that need this feature to show their best work. Starfield is better optimized for AMD cards, but this game is very demanding, and the graphical presentation doesn't always justify the performance overhead. There are undeniably some other problems with Starfield, mostly things that make this game feel more last gen than it ought to. Walking on snow leaves no footprints, and diving into the water in New Atlantis doesn't get your clothes wet. There's also this weird head turning, where my avatar would look hard to the left for no reason, and the way that loading screens and instancing works on planets. To say that the majority of the areas you land in are instanced anyway, having buildings you have to sub-instance into, separated by a loading screen, feels weird. Having to unlock 2 airlocks just to walk through another loading screen is demoralizing, and the takeoff and landing portions of space gameplay are non-existent, which creates a disconnect from the purpose of having a ship outside of a handful of space combat sections and another inventory. You could have argued these parts of the game feel like they might have been held back, or at least designed with some consideration for last-gen consoles. But this is a PC and Xbox Series only game. These aren't game-breaking problems, but they are unusual choices for a game that was hopefully aiming to be more than Fallout in space, and instead be something new. Regardless of these flaws, underneath everything is a spark. Early on in the game, you are struck with the scale and scope of this world, and while a lot of people will rightly point out that large parts of it are empty wasteland, and yes, the game's planets really beg out for the addition of a small buggy or ATV, but there's plenty to catch your eye and make you want to take a look. This game gives a really strong first impression, but sadly wears on you until you experience a single element of it long enough to see that these systems aren't that deep. They just feel that way because some of the options are gated off via skill checks. This leaves the current iteration of Starfield in a strange place. If you are familiar with a common piece of sports commentary, this game has a high floor but a low ceiling. It never feels bad or broken. It just feels like it should be better or feel newer. The nicest thing I can say is that this will not be the death of Starfield, and it may even be the catalyst for this to evolve into the greatest space RPG we will ever get to play. This game has so much empty right now that one way or another, Bethesda themselves or the modding community will get this space filled. Personally, I found Starfield fun for around 20 to 30 hours, and after that I had to push myself onwards to see the story's ending. I found that there was this fatigue that set in with the gameplay once you've tried a bit of everything and realised the limitations. Or, like myself, you realise that this feels like a Fallout game cosplaying. The costume change didn't do enough to make this stand out beyond the previous Bethesda titles, and I really struggled to see where the gameplay evolution was. Some players might be unwilling or unable to push past this, while others will really appreciate the consistency. I landed somewhere in the middle and found myself wishing that there was a more meaningful change, as it feels like we now have 3 IPs that feel and play this exact same way. You just have to pick your favourite flavour of Bethesda. Yet in many ways, I can still see Starfield's value. That, coincidentally enough, leads me to a very easy conclusion. Starfield is the perfect Game Pass game. And while I'm not certain this will get Xbox consoles flying off the shelves like it's the Switch at the start of the pandemic, there's enough positivity here that both Bethesda and Microsoft can claim this is a victory. Even the most pessimistic side of me will concede that this experience feels a lot better because I didn't have to pay full retail for it.